I went to sunny Rhyl so that you don't have to. But wait, not everything was closed. I looked and searched and found some fascinating facts. Join me as we have a grand tour around some of the secrets of Rhyl. Where better to start a video about sunny Rhyl than on the beach? But less than 100 years ago, this wasn't the beach, and this wasn't a pile of rubble. These concrete pieces are all that remains today of Salem Bungalow, which once stood here, surrounded by rose gardens, flower gardens and vegetable gardens. Salem Bungalow succumbed to the encroaching sea during a mighty storm in 1944. The full, fascinating story of Salem Bungalow is told on our other channel. There's a link in the description below. Rhyl Golf Course is one of the oldest golf courses in Wales, but it keeps moving. When the Marine Hydro Hotel opened in the 1890s, it was possible to watch people playing golf from the hotel's smoking room. The original clubhouse had opened in 1893. Don't panic, but the building was officially opened by the then president of the golf club, Captain Mannering. Nothing remains of much of the golf course either. There's just a sea of bungalows. Due to the residential development encroaching on the golf links, the golf club moved and ended up about where it is today. Mostly. I say that because at one time the golf links were at either side of Salem Bungalow, and as we know, Salem Bungalow was lost to the sea, and so too was some of the golf course. When the concrete promenade and sea defences were complete, the golf course had shrunken considerably and there was no longer enough space for the full 18 holes, which is why the course is just 9 holes in length. Today, the golf course is, of course, like much of Rhyl, closed. However, it will reopen in a few years' time. Construction is currently underway on building an earth embankment around 3 sides of the course. The embankment will, I believe, be at least 6 feet or 2 meters tall. The idea is that if the sea breaches the current promenade and sea defences, then the golf course will act as a temporary lagoon containing the floodwater until after the storm has passed. At the bottom of Rhyl High Street, we find one of the town's clock towers. Although it is not particularly tall or impressive, it is still an iconic landmark of the town, and it must be said, the design of it is quite attractive. It's so important that it is sometimes illuminated at night. But the clock tower hasn't always been here, in the middle of a roundabout. First built in 1948, it was located nearby on the promenade. In the 1990s, a Welsh craftsman stonemasonry company dismantled the clock tower. Each stone was carefully numbered and logged. The tower was then rebuilt, stone by stone, in this location, where it still stands today. To be fair, Rhyl is perhaps not the first town you think of when talking about architecture, but I thought I should cover it anyway. Here we have the former Woolworths, and a new indoor market which is disguising itself as an industrial estate, and the job centre which appears to have closed down. Without doubt, though, a highlight surely must be this Art Deco cinema, which is now a bingo hall. At the far end of Rhyl's promenade, we find the harbour, where there are many secrets for us to discover. The harbour is at the mouth of the River Clwyd and has been an important shipping location for many hundreds of years. When King Edward I of England built his castle nearby at Rhuddlan, he employed a team of labourers to straighten and dredge the river between Rhyl and Rhuddlan. This meant that he could supply the castle by sailing ship, even though Rhuddlan is some 3 miles inland. At low tide, if you look carefully on the east side of the river, you might notice some timbers in the mud bank. These are the remains of the City of Ottawa, a large Canadian sailing ship. Built in 1860, she carried cargo around the world. In 1906, the ship sustained damage during a storm and was abandoned here. At the far side of the river mouth, there is a sandy area called Horton's Nose. It's so called because from above it looks a bit like a nose, and it was once owned by a chap called Horton. Today it is a nature reserve, but in 1962 it was the operating base for British United Airways. A regular service was planned, flying between Rhyl and Moreton, or perhaps Wallasey, on the Wirral Peninsula. But it wasn't an aeroplane, and it wasn't a boat. It was a hover coach. Sadly, the service proved to be unreliable, and the service closed after the craft suffered engine failures of both its lift engines. 3 days later, during a storm, the hovercraft, with crew on board, broke free from its moorings. The Rhyl lifeboat rescued the crew, but the craft was dashed against the groins, rendering it unrepairable. If you'd like to walk all over Horton's Nose, then it can be reached on foot by crossing the Ponty Dreg. This is the newest bridge across the River Clwyd and was opened in October 2013. The decks each side of the central tower can be raised to allow tall yachts to pass underneath. When open, the bridge vaguely resembles a dragon, which is handy as its name translates into English as the Dragon's Bridge. I would show you the bridge raised, but when I visited the Harbour office was closed. A map from the year 1900 shows that the harbour was once an important industrial centre. There were several landing stages, a shipbuilding yard and a sawmill. Part of today's caravan sites were marked as being a rifle range. The harbour was served by the railway. On the west bank of the River Clwyd, a branch line ran past Rhuddlan, St Asaph and on to Denby. There was also a short branch which ran as far as the sawmills. The road bridge is locally nicknamed the Blue Bridge, but when it was constructed it was not blue. The bridge was designed by R.G. Whiteley, who was also designer of another well-known blue bridge in North Wales. The Blue Bridge of Rhyl opened in 1932 after being constructed by Dorman, Long and Company of Middlesbrough. That might not be a company which you've heard of, but apparently they were quite good at building bridges. They also built this one at Runcorn, this one in Newcastle upon Tyne, this one in London, and this one. The Blue Bridge replaced an earlier bridge which had been a toll bridge. It wasn't in quite the same location. If you look closely at the Rhyl side of the river, there is this curious stone structure which is actually a bridge abutment. At the opposite side of the river, there is another bridge abutment which is now the foundations for a house. This was the site of the earlier road bridge. In fact, we can follow the original line of the road at the Rhyl side of the river. The wasteland is what was once the shipbuilding yard. The bridge which once stood here was built here in 1861, but was deteriorating badly. It became so weak that eventually buses were banned from using the bridge, which was annoying because bus passengers would have to climb off one bus, walk across the bridge, then climb onto another bus. The Blue Bridge solved that problem. The marine lake is unique in North Wales as it is actually a saltwater lake. The lake is man-made and was opened to the public on the 24th of May 1895, which was the same day as Queen Victoria's birthday. The lake is fed by seawater and the water level is controlled by sluice gates which stop all the water from running out at low tide. Constructed as a public amenity, the lake was and still is a popular place for canoeing, rowing, sailing and yachting. It is possible to walk around the lake following the footpath. In Rhyl, you will today find the oldest miniature steam railway which was constructed specifically for passenger pleasure rides. The railway is now operated by a registered charity, but the railway and the steam engines do have an interesting story. When the railway first opened in 1911, there was just one locomotive, but the railway soon began to grow. In 1912 there was a change of ownership when Rhyl Amusements Limited took over. Rhyl Amusements had an engineer called Albert Barnes, under whose guidance the amusement park beside Marine Lake was growing rapidly. Albert Barnes and Company was a company building fairground rides such as water chutes and roundabouts at their workshops called Albion Works, which is now a bus depot on Finnangrew Road in Rhyl. In 1913, Albert Barnes and Company constructed the first of Rhyl's miniature railways' distinctive open carriages. Just 6 years later, in 1919, Albert Barnes and Co. were working on building their very own steam locomotives. In total, 6 were built, 4 of which were put to work on Rhyl Miniature Railway. You can still ride today on the same steam trains that were designed and built in Rhyl. Today, the railway has a surprisingly large collection of steam locomotives and rolling stock. The town hall of Rhyl is worth a mention, particularly for its tower, which shares something in common with another tower located in Pisa, Italy. Yes, it's the Leaning Tower of Rhyl. Look closely and you will see that the tower is leaning forwards. The tower started leaning many years ago. One potential problem was that if it did topple over, then it would fall onto the building opposite, the police station. However, it is now propped up safely and securely. Rhyl Town Hall opened in October 1876. To celebrate the opening, a parade was held along the streets of the town. Crowds watched 4 bands as well as the town's fire engine and lifeboat as they paraded around the town. The town hall was used for many purposes, including markets, offices, the fire station, and even a soup kitchen. A library was added in 1907. Andrew Carnegie, a Scottish philanthropist who made his money in the USA, contributed financially to establishing the library. Back in the days when Rhyl was establishing itself as a holiday resort, it was fashionable to take an interest in some of the simpler things in life. Public parks and gardens were very popular. In those days, the parks and gardens were very well tended and planted with impressive floral displays. Botanical Gardens took things a step further. They were gardens planted with examples of a wide variety of plants and trees. Some were exotic species and some were rather more common. However, botanical gardens were a popular place to study, discover and perhaps paint or draw a wide range of plant life. The botanical gardens of Rhyl are perhaps a shadow of their former self, but we can still see glimpses of their former past. Back in the good old days, the botanical gardens would have been full of people looking at and learning about different species of trees, flowers, plants and bushes. They were a place where some rare or exotic plants were all gathered into one small space. People would have come here with their crayons or watercolours to paint pretty pictures, or perhaps just to sit in quiet contemplation. In 1928, the Botanical Gardens had undergone some considerable investment. As well as beautiful gardens, there were also tennis courts, bowling greens, children's swings, and even a miniature golf course. The Botanical Gardens were so popular that it was worth the provision of a regular bus service between the gardens and the promenade. Today we have the internet if we want to find out what a particular plant looks like. It's a shame really, but I guess that is progress for you. Rhyl Football Club came to the Belle Vue Gardens, which were right beside the Botanical Gardens. The football club is still here today. At the side of the football ground is this unassuming one-stop convenience store. But it was once the frontage of a huge building which served a very important purpose in Rhyl. The rapid growth of Rhyl in the later 1800s saw hotels and guest houses opening rapidly. And in those days there were no such things as automatic washing machines. This was the site of Grange Laundry, where bed linen and clothes were brought daily to be washed. Dirty laundry was brought here by horse-drawn wagons from as far away as Llandudno. Such was the demand that in 1909 a spot check was undertaken to check for compliance with the Factory Act. At 9 p.m. it was found that staff were still working after starting their shift as early as 6 a.m. That works out at a shift in excess of 15 hours. The laundry remained in business right through to the 1970s. Although this action-packed jaunt around sunny Rhyl is drawing to a close, please do wait, there is more. I haven't even touched on the promenade and its secrets yet. Watch out for that in another video coming soon. Meanwhile, thanks for watching. It's time now for me to say goodbye, Hwyl fawr, and have a grand tour.